that's equally interesting. And the only request to all the participants is please stay on till the last minute of the entire day because it's heavily packed and some of the wonderful professionals who are there. And the topics have been chosen not like generic things like inventory management, logistics management. We really hate those topics. Yes, we will be very specific, very focused. Our next session is on resilience, and it often spoken but not practiced. So that's a whole thing. I thought like we should have this, and we have some of the best professionals in our team, like Dr. Ravi Prakash Mathur from Reddy's, and he's known to every supply chain professional in India. We have Vijay Shetty from Alchem and Chandan from Aragon and Amit Desai from Lupin. So these are the speakers who are going to be part of this panel discussions. And without much delay, I'm going to hand over to Ravi. And as before, you can start posting the questions. Just wait for some time, listen to them, what's the context and what they're talking about. And then you can post the questions on the chat box. And depending on the time availability, Ravi will pick up those questions and ask to the panelists. Thank you so much. And over to Ravi.
Thank you, Venkatesh. At the outset, let me congratulate you and CII for having picked up this topic for discussion on this platform of Think Global, Act Local. And as you rightly pointed out, this is a oft-repeated topic that people talk about with a lot of enthusiasm and and is discussed in many forums, but hardly any actionable things actually have been discussed, and it's very topical, it's very contemporary. So, and thank you for putting together this august panel of Amit, Vijay and Chandan, whom I know very well, and I'm sure they'll contribute with their expertise, this distinguished panel that we have for today's discussion. So I will not come in between the audience and the experts on the subject, but I'll just take a minute to set the context. And the context is that in the last few years, we have seen a lot of disruptions. I mean, starting with the pandemic itself, where there were lockdowns, a lot of manufacturing areas globally were shut down. We had barely come out of the pandemic, and then we had the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and we can't shy away any longer from talking about military conflict. Then couple of years into the military conflict, and then we had this the war at Gaza, and now the Red Sea crisis, which has affected all our supply chain professionals, and with the complexity of sanctions and trade embargoes imposed by shipping lines. So resilience is something that everybody is really concerned about, but very few people know what to do about it. So I'll just give one perspective from my side, and then we can, move into the questions. Just like an army, even at times of peace, is always doing a drill. It is always ready for war. Whether there is a chance of a military conflict or not, the army or the defense forces, they are always practicing, and always ready and be in a drill. So somehow I think resilience also needs to be, looked at with the same lens. I'll start with you, Amit. And my question to you is, it's not really simple, but it will require, your attention. How has the concept of resilience shifted over time? What used to be considered resilience in an organization earlier, and what is it now? What is the shift that has happened? So let us just use that question to set the context for the further discussions.
Right. Hello, everyone. Very good morning to all. Ravi, thanks, and thanks, Venkatesh. So, Ravi very rightly said, this topic of resilience in a different setting usually was being discussed within the supply chain professionals. With the impending crisis which had happened in the past, like COVID, the wars, this has become a boardroom topic. So that the significance, because it has become an existential crisis for all of the industry, specifically for the pharma industry because of the intricate supply chain and the complex operations also in this regard. So with if you ask me, we were always, as an industry, resilient, but it was being discussed in pockets within the organization. The pandemic has really catapulted it into a boardroom discussion, and something that the industry has started focusing on: building resilience, using the word and term resilience in the right manner. I would say we were always resilient, and we keep responding to the crisis. The only thing which, in my personal opinion, Ravi, are we really there, or are we ready? Always baffles my mind, because we keep responding. Are we prepared for something which is not anticipated? Is something that is would always come back as a question to me from a resilience point of view. So I totally feel that, this is a much discussed topic across the board, and especially in the supply chains and the procurement functions across, specifically in the pharma industry.
Thank you, Amit. And so basically, you're saying resilience was always there as a, as an activity or as a point of discussion. What the recent disruptions have done is they have escalated, and now it's become on the board. So that is one point that you have mentioned. But for my sake, and for the sake of the audience over here, I mean, just to put it maybe at the risk of oversimplifying, just help us understand what exactly is meant when you say that a organization is resilient. I mean, in very simple term, in a layman terms, what does resilience mean in the business context?
If I have to just put it in one single line: response to crisis. It's more like, how do you respond? For example, let me take the example of the latest Red Sea crisis. So we never had a plan to see what was coming, but how quickly all the organizations across the industry were able to turn around, find an alternate. Of course, there was a cost impact, but did it result in really a chaos in terms of non-availability? I think the industry has matured, everyone is matured, and we've been able to overcome this crisis. After a period of time, it has stabilized. So that's how I look at it, Ravi.
Okay, thanks for that wonderful insight. My takeaway from your responses, the ability to respond to a crisis or contingency, and you very brightly pointed out one more thing, which is the cost aspect to the ability to respond, and which will be my second question, which I'll put to Chandan. What are the implications for resilience? People say there has to be resilience, but it is expensive. We need to build contingency plans, but it is expensive. So, what are the dimensions around cost that are points of discussions at senior levels in organizations? What are your thoughts about it?
Good morning, Raviji, and good morning, Amit, Vijay. Pleasure to be with you all here. And once again, I would also like to congratulate Venkatesh and Kamakshi and the CII Elite team for putting up this panel discussion. Just a quick intro about my organization. So I'm representing Aragen, which is a CRO CDMO operating in pharma industry. So most of my co-panelists and attendees would either be a customer to us or a potential customer with whom we will do the R&D. And why I did this is because it's very important in the context in the industry which we operate, resilience. But directly coming to the question what Raviji asked me, what are the cost implications? So first is resilience, as Amit very rightly mentioned, is response time to crisis. I would like to just add one word: response to any change, because there are so many changes happening around, and they can be positive changes, they can be negative changes. Just to give an example, how well you are resilient to the regulatory changes, how well you are resilient to the competitive landscape changes are all there. Now, what are the costs involved? If you want to be resilient, obviously you need to build a lot of plan Bs and plan Cs, contingency plans. So like we are in a R&D industry. So what is resilience for us? I should be able to do research if there is a shift in the research therapeutic area, or if certain molecule or NC is not progressing. So I need to invest in a lot of capabilities. So that is one cost. So huge capital cost is required because you need a lot of diversification in your ability to feed the market needs. That's one cost. And it also includes the space, etc. So after the capital cost, obviously, because you have invested so much, and especially in the pharma industry where you operate in a regulatory environment, you can't just leave even if capacity is unutilized. You need to still maintain it at certain standards, whether it is warehouse, whether it is operations, whether it is people. People, even if your facility is lying unutilized and people are not doing their day-to-day routine, you need to keep training them, keep assessing them. So my second cost would be high cost of operation and maintenance. That's there. Third cost would be the people cost, because as you are investing in a lot of capabilities, you need a lot of subject matter experts to operate them. And then that brings you to a upskilled, upgraded resources in form of manpower, which needs to be available. That would be their third. And fourth cost, which I can think about as of now, is loss of leverage, loss of economics of scale. Because if you are operating with a resilient plan, so just a simple example in supply chain, one of the first mitigation plan to create, to avoid any risk or to be resilient is have multi-sources, multi-supply partners. So when you have multi-supply partners, you are going to divide your volumes, and obviously you are not going to put your one egg in a basket. And if you are trying to look at geography de-risking, then the pricing will again vary. So loss of leverage or economics of scale is going to be another cost. And lastly is your inventory cost. That is obviously going to be a big factor because you need to. So supply chains have gradually evolved over lean principles, Six Sigma, and working towards just in time. I think pandemic and some of these kind of global disruptions brought back the concept of inventory, where they said, no, if there is a global disruption, you need things in your hand. It can be vendor managed inventory or local inventory, in-house inventory. So these are some of the aspects which I can think about. But yes, as we discuss more, maybe more factors can come out from my esteemed co-panelists.
Thank you, Chantan, for that very detailed response. And really like the points that you have put across. In fact, I made a note of what you said for my own reference later. But let me just summarize. You mentioned that resilience is not about external disruptions. It applies to all aspects of the organization, including R&D, production, and the ability to respond to any sort of a change. Like you said, a change in a therapeutic area, a change in the R&D landscape. You need to kind of have a plan B or a plan C. Those are the terms that you had used. And I'll summarize. You had said capital cost, training, which is cost of people, cost of operations. And then you also had talked about multi-sourcing, multiple plants, and those sort of a thing. So I'm impressed with your answer, but I won't let you go with that. Now, basically, what you're saying is that we have to build redundancies, right? And that redundancies, as you mentioned, could be in inventory, it could be in alternate sources of supplies, alternate plants, but redundancy will come at a cost, right? And when you build redundancies, you might or might not be operating to full capacity, right? That is the entire idea around redundancy. For example, in the popular theory of constraints, we kind of design for peak consumption, right? For example, a petrol pump in a city, it is not choked, it does not have a long queue throughout the day. It is only during the peak traffic hours, the office hours. You see, it is actually choked till capacity. So rest of the time, there is nobody in the petrol pump queuing up to take petrol. So the asset is basically not utilized. So how do you have this fine balance of building redundancies and also not kind of creating assets that are not sweating? So just want to hear your thoughts on that.
No, good question, Raviji. And it's always a pleasure when you ask a follow-up question. It actually triggers a lot of thoughts internally. Now, coming to your question on how do you do build redundancy, see, we need to do profiling of the risk or the change you are anticipating. In case only the critical or strategic products, categories, customers, or situations would need the deep level of redundancy, or you will have to do a surface level of redundancy. Now, what I'm saying from there is, Say, you just gave a petrol pump example. Let's take that. Say, if a petrol pump is located in a industrial area where there are not going to be too much of regular traffic, they will still have to plan for it, but maybe say 4 filling stations should be fine enough. But if they are in the midst of a city area where the peak traffic can always be there for longer hours in a day. So example, when we say peak period, for the industrial area, it may be a 1 hour or 2 hour zone. For the city, it may convert into 4 hour zone. Keeping on that, then you need to decide what is going to be your redundancy. Example, in our case, what we do. So we all know the therapeutic areas which are very common are oncology. So we have developed a lot of additional capabilities focusing on that zone because we know that's a priority area. But at the same time, inflammation or other therapeutics area are also in demand, but we have not invested that heavily. So it all goes with the profiling and your strategic priorities around it. Obviously, everything needs to get prioritized, but ultimately the cost is going to be a key factor because that gets passed on to the customer and to the end consumer. So is that product or category going to be able to survive that cost adverse impact? Is something we all need to be conscious about. And so my answer would be profiling and strategic priority should be the factor. And then redundancy can have level. You can have a deep redundancy available, or maybe a primary redundancy. You can create, say, I will not have multiple sources, 3 or 4, but I will focus on 2 sources, or a single source with a long-term rate contract. Something of that kind can be planned. So that's on the strategic priority and profiling.
Fantastic. So basically, you are saying know your business,
Yeah.
do correct profiling, do correct segmentation, build redundancies around critical paths. I mean, resilience is not a broad, paint of brush where you kind of build waste. If you we can use another way, build waste around all processes, but know what you're doing, strategize, and put your money behind, what on processes and business areas that really matter. So that's a very practical approach, and which would be my question for Vijay Shetty. We like to hear from you. What are some practical strategies around building resilience? It talked about the subject broadly at a conceptual level, but down to brass tracks, what are some practical strategies that we can consider while building resilience in our organizations?
Yeah, thank you, Ravi, for the question. Okay, first of all, I would like to congratulate Venkatesh and the entire CII team from bringing us all together and having this wonderful session. Okay, coming to the question, Ravi, first of all, I think this topic itself is very important for every organization. And resilience is not by choice, but it is now by design in any of our, whether it is a supply chain strategy that we design, okay, or the business plans that we design. Okay? We always look at what are the disruptions going to happen, or what are the near I would say near emerging trends that is going to happen and which might impact the organization in the short term and long term. Okay, so first I think what we do is to anticipate what are the risks involved. Okay, like for example, if we have only one manufacturing unit in a particular zone, okay, how do you look at de-risking it? What are your plans on AVDs, alternate vendor sources, or alternate ways of manufacturing? Those are all filtered through a BCP, which is a continuous improvement plan, and it could be for a short term as well as for a long term perspective. Okay, so once you build that, later on, we look at how do we actually execute it. Execute it in the sense, how do we bring into action, okay, and the cost related to it. So the cost doesn't look at, okay, it is only a supply chain cost, but what you also need to marry it with the business plan, which means the sales and marketing are very clear that, okay, for this top 10 or 20 strategic projects, we really want to take market share and or whatever business plans they have. And supply chain is clearly backing it with clear supply, no supply disruptions at all. Okay, and there are few molecules which we are very clear, maybe not giving us high margin products and all that, that we need not even invest on the resilience strategy, and we are ready to even give away the business. I think that's where I would say that clarity needs to happen when we are actually planning for our annual business plan. Okay, and that's where I talk about the execution piece of it. And the other aspect is the adaptive. Like, what are the things required? Like, say, from not from a business perspective, but from a supply chain perspective. Okay, Chandan and Amit also talked about it a bit. How can you de-risk your operations? Okay, how can you have more AVDs from manufacturing perspective? How can you make sure from a shipping logistics perspective? Okay, whether it is Red Sea, Ukraine war, and or another war which is going to come up. Okay, we know how our shipping companies are going to behave uh, in the past, and based on that experience, can we actually look at tying up directly with the shipping companies or the airlines for a short term or long term agreements? What are the different business models that we have not even tried or we want to test? Okay. Today, in this crisis where we're talking about Red Sea, we are all experiencing, I would say, a lot of, I would say, stress at the air shipment ways. Companies have now looked at how do we look at doing multimodal, or how do we look at air kind of a multimodal kind of a shipment. So these are some of the initiatives which will definitely happen. It's not that we plan it, but we adapt to how do we solve a business problem. And then we look at clearly shaping it up, saying that what it actually makes sense. I'm telling from my experience at Alchem, when we look at pre-COVID scenario and COVID scenario, and now there are many initiatives that we planned when we looked at resilience being one of the key factors in our business planning has paid results. Okay, there were shipping companies which were charging even for a US destinations to even $14,000, and we ended up only paying $7,000 for that. Okay, so those are some of the benefits. I would not say it is a cost, but actually when we strategize it in the right direction, not in silos, but in collaboration with business into your manufacturing and the entire ecosystem of your suppliers, you are well poised to actually execute your strategy in the right manner. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and it also throws up more questions because you have, given us fodder for thought. Couple of things, about what you said. One is, of course, strategic alignment. So the front end, the supply chain operations, you have to be very clearly aligned about what we are trying to achieve over here. You mentioned about strategic molecules or strategic products around which alignment needs to be there. You also mentioned about learning from the past. What did we learn from the previous crisis? And one very interesting, or rather two interesting aspects that you mentioned was new ideas, new solutions, thinking out of the box. And the most important word you used was adaptability. So when you are hit by a crisis, you not necessarily need to go back to a charted out plan B or a plan C. You also need to respond on the go. As the crisis emerges, you need to come with a plan, and that is what you mentioned by adaptability. All very important points. But I'll ask you a follow-up question about a term that you have used about BCP, business continuity planning. So my question is, how should organizations look at business continuity planning, BCPs? Who actually runs it? Is it the top management? Is it the middle management at the operational level? Who should own it? What actually happens in these BCP kind of strategies?
In a BCP kind of a strategy, I'll take an example. Okay, a practical example of so since I'm responsible for supply chain, I own the BCP for one of the plants which is situated for our domestic branded business, and if when I look at today that particular plant, if anything happens, okay, in the past we had because it is in the seismic zone, we had floods, and often we see that okay, the trucks are not plying for 1 week or 2 weeks. In fact, last year we had a scenario where for almost 1.5 years the plant was almost getting to shut down. Okay, and we had a risk had we not had decent inventory levels, we would have had also businesses lost. So idea as to how do we actually run that, okay, rather than the top management telling you. I think we as business, we are also business owners, okay, in terms of not owners per se that we don't own shares, but like when we come to, we can always suggest an alternate plan in terms of how do we go about, maybe on the short term what we can do, and in the long term what we can do. Okay, now the complexity, particularly when I talk about pharma companies, okay, with the new introductions of QR code, and other things. Okay, what happens? It becomes very difficult because QR code requires a lot of investment as well. Now, understand if your manufacturing activity is in a zone where most of your products with QR codes are getting manufactured, and if you want to switch over, that time is so. We looked at various areas, bifurcating into saying that if we have to react. Okay, what is the timeline? If it is a longer lead time, then that action starts now. We don't wait for the next monsoon to come. Before that, we make our AVDs ready, alternate plans ready to where to manufacture it, get that things approved from our quality, production, our CMOs as well, and also get it approved from our management as well, so that we are able to execute that strategy. It's not that we are immediately moving, but maybe could be maybe 100 batches we will manufacture maybe in our plant, but alternatively, we will also set up infrastructure in such a way that at least 1 or 2 batches would get manufactured, so that at the end, if let's say the shit hits the fan, we are in a better position to actually de-risk ourselves rather than carrying huge amount of inventory from maybe 60 to even 180 days. Okay, that's not a good strategy. Okay, and of course, who has to execute? The answer it is we who has to propose and take a buy-in from the organization. I'm sure we are as leaders need to do those kind of difficult question, because if that doesn't happen, we are supply chain guys. Anything which doesn't happen, we are blamed for it as well. So I think we as well as take the ownership of actually correcting it and making sure the future, we look at the future and start preparing for it now.
Very clear and very sharp answers, Vijay. So basically, you said people who are owning the business, people who are operating the business, actually need to take ownership and create those business continuity plans. And the other aspect you brought into the discussion was to factor in the time to react or the lead times. If you just can't start a BCP today and expect it to show results tomorrow. So when you are aware of the time it will take for reacting to get that change in place, you need to factor that and work backwards. If it is 10 months, then you need to act 10 months in advance. So great for bringing that dimension around time into the discussion. Amit, I need to come back to you again. And
Before that,
in this,
Ravi, I wanted to add a couple of points.
yeah,
I was
please
waiting for
go
my
ahead.
turn.
Yeah.
In terms of cost, I just felt that what's the most important factor today, which, in pharma, what everyone is investing into is IT enablement. If you have observed that, most of the pharma companies are having a CIO position, which was not existing earlier. Uh, so that I believe, and when I'm saying this, I am putting across a point that when you build in resilience, like what Vijay was mentioning and Chandan was mentioning, is you need to have a peek into everywhere, the end-to-end visibility. End-to-end visibility currently is available in pockets. How do you bring it onto one platform and getting that visibility across the stakeholders for them to take the right decisions at the right point in time? I strongly believe that is a key piece for enabling the resilience in an organization. And I would like to add one more word or fact that uh, what makes us resilient or what enables resilience is agility in the organization. We need to be agile for everything. We work in a highly regulated industry, and taking a cue from Vijay, we have to work. If it's a packaging component, in today's world, we are looking at a lead time of 8 to 12 months. And just taking that example forward, all of us who are in this business have been discussing very much in detail with the entire industry on the packaging side to understand what capacities, what capabilities, what redundancies they are building to ensure that per se all the customers, their customers, which are us and our end customers, are de-risked from anything which is not available or shortages. So, and we have seen that there has been significant, although late, but COVID was by far the reason which really put in, I would say, uh, reap benefits for certain companies, and many of those companies redeployed what they got in terms of enabling their uh, enhancing their capacities and making this available. So this cost angle and IT enablement, I believe, goes a long way, and every organization in one way or the other is investing. The one more piece that I would like to add is, uh, which we are recently we there are, like Venkatesh mentioned, where there are not many use cases, but something called generative artificial intelligence that needs to be tested. Probably, in my understanding, the this concept is where we would be around 30 years back when the internet was introduced. We are probably at that stage now, and in my personal opinion, maybe 5 or 10 years down the line, a lot of these activities, a lot of resilience, a lot of models will be built automatically and will be thrown up, where we have intelligent questions and we think differently. The one more point that I wanted to bring is, I'm not sure, as professionals, uh, we know there are certain impending situations where we have discussed internally in our supply chains, but at least I have not seen this discussion go beyond our internal discussions with the partners. We do that for our, say, active ingredients, excipients, packaging materials, but suppose, say, logistics, and you are an expert, Ravi, so let me uh, ask you this. We know there are certain crises which are there, which are looming large in the horizon. How are we prepared? Are we engaging with the logistics community to mitigate those, like the Taiwan crisis? We are sitting on it, probably thinking that it might come, might not come, but are we looking forward? That is my question, because certain learnings, as I said, from a resilience point of view, how are we doing as an industry to cope up with these kind of Red Sea? Probably we didn't see it coming, or we knew, but we were not really this thing. How do we, Ravi? Your thoughts, expertise would enlighten the entire uh, the
Thanks
entire
for putting
contingent.
me
Yeah.
thanks for putting me on the spot, Amit, and I was not at all prepared for that question. But anyway, since you have put this question, yes, discussions are happening with global freight forwarding companies, global shipping lines, and something interesting, something some things like a geopolitical disruption, which used to be topics of discussion on a Friday evening, or maybe on social media. These have actually come to the center of discussions, and so the logistic companies and people involved in logistics are actually identifying potential choke points that can come. As you mentioned about the potential conflict with Taiwan, the Strait of Malacca becomes a choke point. How do you navigate the South China Sea in case there's a military conflict over there? And yes, the operating procedure and logistics is to find alternate routes, so and alternate solutions, and sometimes it is you know putting a patchwork of multiple multimodal solutions, which I think you mentioned earlier also. So there needs to be a continuity plan around logistics also. It is not that there's a Red Sea crisis and then we start finding an alternate route around South Africa. So logistics, like other aspects of supply chain, is working on it. Thanks for that question. But now I'll have to take control again and ask you that question back to the panel. But before I come to you, Amit, Chandan, is there anything you want to react to, anything that Vijay or Amit have said? So let's keep it interactive, because
Yeah.
rather than going by a fixed set of questions, if you kind of respond to the fellow panelists, the audience will also
Yeah.
kind of
So
benefit.
I think Amit brought up a very valuable point, and one of the key lever to drive resiliency and agility in any organization is the integration and visibility. And no better tool than technology. And unfortunately, the way some of the other industries have adapted to the technology, I think pharma industry by far has been a slow mover. Yes, I'm not saying we are not moved ahead. And a lot of it also arises from the factor that we are regulated, we are highly regulated, and we need to comply with the multiple regulations across the globe. So it's never easy. Like even today, we need to maintain certain hard copy documents for review by certain regulatory authorities. So yes, I totally agree, and that yes adds on to the cost. But when we say technology adaptation, I think it is a totally different dimension, because in a way, yes, we all feel technology brings a lot of resilience and agility. But at the same time, it also creates a lot of dependency, and you need to upgrade your existing ecosystem to match the pace and flexibility which technology brings on the floor. So then that is going to be another cost which is going to come into factor, and we all need to be conscious about it. But I totally agree with Amit, a very valid point. And yes, technology is the key role it's going to play to drive resiliency.
So, Amit, you kind of disrupted the kind of flow that we were talking about resilience, but now I need to address something that you brought up in your conversation,
Yeah.
which is around digital end-to-end visibility, and the other topic that is very it's finding favor nowadays. There's a lot of discussions around it, which is about generative AI, right? You said, how do you kind of build AI models that can take your questions, intelligent questions. You use the word intelligent questions, but I presume you're talking about simulations and doing multiple what if analysis using using Gen AI tools. But here I have a pharma forum, right? And pharma, we know it is about compliance, and pharma is also about risk management. So you need to have a measurement around the risk. My understanding with using Gen AI, the way it is deployed right now, is that these are external servers, right? Using large language models like ChatGPT is just still fine to kind of wordsmith, what you're trying to do. But if you try to use Gen AI in other business processes where you're trying to work with AI with enterprise data, now there would be a risk about having to share your enterprise data with external partners, which of course will become a part of their training data for their AI models. So, what is the current landscape? Are people using Gen AI other than large language models? And what are the risks involved? If we do need to move in that direction, then how do we mitigate that risk of putting our data with external models?
So Ravi, excuse me, I, with my limited understanding, what I see, the challenge with data. So there's an internal database which is intrinsic to the organization, and there's an external database. So when I say external database, which is a paid subscription models and data whatever is available across the internet. So, and there are multiple ways. So this is what generative API, in my understanding, does is you need not share your intrinsic data. You can have it within your cloud and the system, and there are some middlewares or uh, some systems also which are there, which will take your data, which will map the external database, scan everything, and then come up with a total model. Why I said intelligent questions is because the data exists even today. It is not that the data is not there. How do we get, how do we use and deploy the data intelligently? What questions we need to ask to get what kind of, today if we have to do the data analysis, it takes a lot of time for us. A lot of models. Excel by far is the most chosen, and somebody who excels in Excel is something, again, that is something that probably in my understanding, the generative API, I'm not talking of very evolved you know artificial intelligence. I'm talking about something where the data sciences are involved, which will allow us to give an insight to a lot of questions which come to mind, where if you ask a question, it will take days, at least hours, for us to get back with an answer, which will enable. And what happens is your train of thought or in a discussion, would get modulated and will help us become more resilient, more agile, and fast in our decision making, and also the level and the accuracy in the decisions, like cost benefit analysis, whether we need to do this or we should not be doing. Even, for example, today we have to run through our business analytics to figure out uh, our gross margins, everything. Now when we want to do a de-risking, I'll just go back. I am adding this, how it would help is, when you say de-risking of your top 10 molecules, you need to de-risk to a point where every single ingredient is available. If even if one, which is a C or D category material, is not available, you are not going to make the product, and it's going to disrupt. So how do you make, and how do you have those intelligent things? How do you have alternates for everything, and redundancy is built in for everything when you say everything is de-risked? So that, I believe, uh, with this lot of data information which can be processed, can be used intelligently, and we can derive what would have taken a lot of time for us now to arrive at, with the help of these tools and the Gen AI, I believe, should resolve. The only other thing is, I'm not sure how many use cases have been, I haven't seen, but surely there is work going on in that area. If I've addressed your question,
You have, you
Ravi,
have.
and
So basically, you said it's not about enterprise data. It's about data that is already out there. How do you
both,
create a
both.
system of, okay, so you're saying both, using both enterprise data and external data to create an intelligent platform that can kind of harmonize that data, put it all together, clean it, integrate it, and create a platform. And you linked it back to your earlier response of packaging material. So, like every category of material, you are kind of de-risking for your strategic molecule. So that is the sharp answer that you have given to the response.
I may want to add one point.
Yes, thank you.
Particularly, I initially understood like it's more about de-risking if a external vendor comes in, okay, and your data is going to that vendor. How do you ensure that there is, that data is not being used by that vendor partner, whoever comes, whether it for any AI model or of any technology per se. So,
Exactly.
particularly, I would say there are standards defined from an IT perspective. Whenever we engage or before even sharing the data, there are certain protocols that needs to be followed. One is to sign an NDA, that is non-disclosure agreement. And from a data perspective, we have something called as a data breach agreement. Okay. Post that, there is a vendor audit which is being conducted saying that whenever the data is received from an organization, how does this organization make sure that their policy against their policy, how it has been stored, and how that data breach will never happen. Post that audit clearance only, we can then engage with the vendor. So at least particularly in our organization, we have this particular standard operating procedures in line before we even start sharing or engaging, sharing the data with the vendor partner. Okay. Post that, it can definitely take steps. With regards to use cases from an AI, we have not touched on generative AI, but particularly from an AI perspective, at Alchem, we have at least a couple of use cases that we have worked successfully. And as the engine is getting trained, we are getting better and better at that, because anything and more are we are also learning from it, and our knowledge is also getting enhanced. And I'm starting to believe that anything which is a repetitive task, definitely there is a use case for AI.
So repetitive task is the key basically over
Yeah.
here. But
Yeah.
I'd like to hear from Chandan. Chandan, you are involved in R&D. Would you share your R&D data for training an AI model with an external partner? I mean, that is the simple question.
No, very valid point, Raviji. I think, yes, it's definitely a risk, and especially because the data which is available with us is actually not our organization data, it is our customers' data. Actually, they have invested in that route of synthesis, the therapeutic areas, the molecules, what they're doing. But just to add on to what we have been hearing from Amit Vijay also, is there is no way out. We will have to start exploring and using the generative AI. And we at Horizon have explored it. Actually, we have tied up with a generative AI company to use it in the discovery domain. So, because a discovery phase itself is going to take you 4 or 5 years, but here what it does is you just put in the structures, you just put in what is required, and it will run through all the permutation combination and throw you out the potential leads. We have tied it up with, and as Vijay said, a huge team of ADX, or internally we call it as ADX, the IT team of Aragen was involved in doing their due diligence on how robust the structure and data security infrastructure at the vendor is available. And then all these agreements and all were signed. But to be very frank, I think unless the infrastructure is not there, the documents are not going to play a key role. And this was our first fear. Frankly, Raviji, when we proposed this, because internally we formed a cross-functional team to drive digital transformation, and supply chain played a key role in that, led by our CIO. But then when we went and presented it to our business team, the first question came was, there is a risk. There is a risk. What if tomorrow this data breach happens? How is it going to run? Unfortunately, the party which we were tying with, or the partner with whom we were tying, was a Chinese partner, and they were on cloud server. So there was again all the more doubts because of the reputation what we have. But I would like to appreciate the way they responded. They gave all the inputs, and then we have already signed it, and we are using their platform with our customers' consent. Out of our, say, 400 odd customers, we have presented it to our top 10 customers. And let me be open about it. Some of our customers have vocally asked us not to use their data for using that generative AI platform. Though we give them all the confidence saying the data is secure, they have enough infrastructure, they have ISO 27001 certifications, and they are ready to undergo audit, etc. Some of our customers very clearly said, having said that, the industry has not evolved to a level where we can be confident on the current infrastructure that the data breach will not happen. But 8 out of 10 have already agreed. So yes, there is always a apprehension in minds of many people. We can use certain level of audits, due diligence, documents to control it, but it needs a lot more regulation and evolution.
So what I sense is from this panel of experts, all three of you seem to concur that given the risks and, acknowledging the risks that are there in working, with these external partners on AI, the pharma world is open and is already evolving into adapting it into the business processes. Yeah, so I mean, we always think of pharma, which is very slow to respond to change, but here I see that leaders are already working on creating a policy or a framework. Yeah, Chandan, please.
Yeah. So, sir, just to add on one fact I would like to add, when we were evaluating these partners, we were exploring one of the reputed solution partners on the AI ML platform. And in fact, they named one of the reputed global pharma company who have launched initial vaccines. And they endorsed it saying a lot of that vaccine expedition on the commercialization happened due to adoption of this AI ML technology. I can't share more because we are also tied up with NDA. But let me tell you, the vaccine coming faster for pandemic, one of the key factor was the availability of technology which people used, and the result is there. They have not publicized it for various reasons, but yes, during our assessment, they did share that.
Okay, so practically, if I were just to summarize, AI and Gen AI is definitely a strategy that one needs to leverage and factor in while creating your resilient plans. Basically, so not only are we open to it, but work has already happened, and there is significant progress of leveraging AI as a tool for building resilience. So I'll leave that topic for now, but Chandan, I'll move on to the next question for you. In business, every strategy that we talk about, every concept that we talk about has to be measured. So the adage is that what we measure gets improved. To turn it around, if we want to improve something, we have to measure it. And we discussed so many strategies around, creating resilience in the organization. So how do you measure the effectiveness of this strategy? What are some of the KPIs or leading or lagging indicators that whatever you said, you built a plan on excess inventory or excess capacity, training people, all the things that you mentioned about. Are you required to measure the effectiveness of the intervention? And if so, what are some of the ways you can measure the effectiveness of the decisions you take for building resilience?
Oh, it's very important, Raviji. As you rightly said, something which cannot be measured cannot be improved. Then it's all perception. And unfortunately, supply chain is the biggest victim of perception. We all are aware that you can buy it cheaper, you can move it faster, are all the statements we hear in our daily routine from various stakeholders. So, yes, it's important to put a metrics around it to maybe substantiate it with numbers. Now, what are some of the parameters which we can adopt? I think conventional parameters of supply chain can also be used to measure resiliency. Like we have LIFR, line item fill rate, we have OTIFs. So if your resiliency is good, then obviously under disruptive circumstances, still these numbers would look good. So these are there, your back order rate, your excess absolute inventory management, your class A inventory fulfillment rate, your order fulfillment rates. So these are certain conventional parameters I'm talking about, which can always be used. But yes, going beyond that, if you want to really adopt to a high level of resiliency and measure it, some of it can be how do you assess your risk? So we have created a template around third-party risk management and quantified it with a scorecard model. So we have identified certain risks associated and gave a score around it, and how year on year. So we measure it quarter on quarter, but we present it to a yearly basis to the management. How are we reducing that risk score? So some of the factors there are geography dependency. So there we have said how much of your class A material you have huge geography dependency. And then we have created a threshold saying if you are dependent more than certain percentage on a geography, then you are having a geography dependency, and then how you are diversifying it. Likewise, where all you are dependent on the single sources, if you can measure it. Where all you are having too much of data being shared, and then you are observing the vendors are not undergoing audit management or audit observation, major minor observations. So there are a lot of metrics which can be created. I think we have created around 14 metrics to measure the risk score and how are we reducing. So reducing risk score reflects our resiliency improvement. So that's at a very high level I have told, but yes, I would be happy to maybe talk more in details if required. In the interest of time, I'm saying.
Okay, but this is interesting. Even in spite of the shortage of time, I think we need to kind of dive a little deeper on the subject. You talked about matrices, you talked about scorecard, you talked about measuring the effectiveness in multiple ways. But these are like soft numbers. But when you talk about building resilience, there is an investment that is involved in extra capacity, extra manpower, extra inventory, so on and so forth. So there is real cash that is going out of the system. How do you convert these matrices into a hard number like a P&L impact? Is that possible? Is there a desired way to look at it? And if people want to see the P&L impact of of decision that you have taken, like measuring extra business that you have taken or having, created the ability to secure business, is it prudent to see it in hard monetary terms, or even those KPIs enough?
No, it is important. Ultimately, something in the see, we all operate in a very profit-oriented industry. So if you are not contributing to the bottom line, I think sooner than later there will be questions and deterrence around that initiative. So having talked about it, so if you are building an inventory, example, just to say reduce your risk of stockouts, then you can always measure how much additional business could be generated because of availability of that inventory. So just to give an example, we all are aware about Zomato launching Blinkit. Okay, so they had acquired it and then they went to Blinkit and then they went for a 10 minutes delivery. The whole objective of 10 minutes delivery, all said and done, was definitely to serve the customer better. But more than that was how do you grab that instant requirement business? So similarly, if you are building a resiliency in your system, you are opening a new warehouse or you are developing a new vendor, has that vendor helped you avoid certain stockouts or generate some additional business which has contributed to the bottom line has to be measured. Now it all depends on the steps what you have taken, but it has to get linked to the P&L numbers, either in terms of top line or in bottom line. Usually, supply chain can contribute directly to bottom line as well. If we are reducing a dependency on a vendor and getting better rates negotiated, it can directly add on to bottom line. Better availability of inventory can always help in generating better revenues.
Thank you, Chandan. Vijay, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. How do you measure ROI for an investment that you have done to build resilience?
ROI definitely is very important because you then get questioned for whatever proposals on resilience you have submitted. Okay, unless that doesn't translate into business numbers. Okay, so when I compare this from a business perspective compared to last year or last quarter, same year, what has been our business loss vis-a-vis the kind of inventory levels or the AVDs that you have done from a manufacturing perspective or the capacity increase that you have done. Okay, when it comes to from a procurement perspective, saying that okay, instead of keeping a high level of inventory, now let's say I have an alternate vendor from where I can also source and I can maintain the same inventory levels without impacting the working capital. I think that's another measure. The other measure from a logistics perspective, when I look at shipping lines, okay, there was a thought that, okay, yeah, we have to reduce costs. So when you go to MSC and other shipping companies, you definitely get a very good, I would say, the freight rates, okay? But when you look at their lead times, you would look at, you would be a little shocked. But alternatively, you can look at Maersk, okay, whose lead time has been, like, say, I take a destination of US, okay, and it is consistently hitting, let's say, 24, 25 days. And vis-a-vis, I say that, okay, because I was shipping in MSC, whose lead time is 35 to 45 days, okay, for which I also did a lot of air shipments. And when I compare that cost and when if I pay a little bit of premium of let's say 100, 200 or $300 to even marks, that still makes sense because at the end of the day, I'm able to reach faster. I'm able to use a better mode. My air shipment cost definitely goes down. So that's how actually you measure in terms of like what is when you build a particular strategy from a resilience perspective. So today we have a short term as well as a long term contracts with the shipping companies as well as in the other parts of the world as well in terms of how we operate. Okay, so definitely it has to have an impact and the markets that we are in. Okay, gone are those days that where we would receive forecast for the next 6 months or 12 months and all the customers are going to adhere to that. Okay, it's a different volatile market as we are today in. Okay, either that stock can be bought or the stocks will remain in your warehouse. Okay, but at the same time there are also opportunities because there are a lot of your competitors who might get FDA regulatory compliance issue, and then maybe your demand of 9 month inventory can suddenly go in 1 month itself. Okay, so that's a trade-off between the business loss versus the business gain that you want to do it, but that you do it in collaboration with, as I said, nothing in silos, but this has to be an agreement, a business agreement. Together we take the strategies or make the strategies work.
Thank you, Vijay. So couple of things that you said. There's speed that is required. There's a cost associated with that speed. You take that call after doing a trade-off, whether you want to bear, accept that cost of speed, which can eventually help you to kind of take advantage or take leverage of the situation. The other thing you said that it's a disrupted environment. Gone are the days of 6 months stable forecast. So the forecast accuracy on the demand side, even supply resilience, supply reliability is impacted by the disruption. So you have to take that decision on investment accordingly. So and you also said, a crisis is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, Amit, in one of your earlier comments, you said that people actually took advantage or something with a smile on your face. You said people made hay while the sun shone, When the sun shines, you make hay. So it's like taking leverage out of a crisis. So would you like to share your thoughts? That's a very counterintuitive way of thinking and you're right, people have made money out of crisis. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
want just want to
So
hear your thoughts.
whatever was, I can share what my experience was specifically with the packaging industry, where since this crisis came up, there was a huge demand for all the components required for the vaccines. and whatever contracts with the generic pharma industry had with the suppliers, the big pharma went there and practically bought the lines and the equipment for the next 2 or 3 years. They booked everything, and it was all paid upfront. Now, what happened is that created a challenge for the generic industry, but that made the vaccines available faster, quicker in the market. But it had an impact on the entire overall availability in the industry. But what I could see when I spoke to a few of those organizations is the moment they understood, they deployed that money into adding more capacities. They immediately started, even during those times they invested in the capacities, they started building, uh, I can use the word multiplying the capacities, not increasing it in small amounts. So they built one for one and one for two. So that's how a lot of capacity got built in, a lot of investments got channelized back into, because when you have a lot of money and you know what your specialized business you are into, uh, you put back where you know what you can do better. And that's what I have seen few of the niche manufacturers do, and plow back in creating huge capacities. The lead times, Ravi, what has happened is, as a result of that, in many cases reduced from say 12 months to 4 months, and now practically to a month or so, where people are holding inventories across. Plus that also created various models where they started building warehouses, holding the stocks to make sure that uh, these stocks are available for us. That leads to another point, Ravi, what where I was saying visibility, and that's very critical in when we operate. So when we operate, we need to have visibility across with our partners. When I say partners, uh, without them we don't exist, and without us they don't exist. It's very simple. It's a symbiotic relationship. It is not a parasitic relationship. So all our partners in the chain, where we are dependent, we need to go back, understand, and which is where probably I believe, not now but in the future. I know in the past we have tried to work on those models where we had integrated uh, our planning scenarios and try to map it with them. Uh, but I believe at that point in time when we did that, Ravi, the maturity in the industry was not, it was not so evolved. Probably now is a time where we have seen a lot of pandemics crisis, where there will be more openness in sharing that information and data. uh, I also believe personally that when you sit across and speak to business partners, the CEOs, the CXOs, and the owners and people down the line, there is a clear understanding that the business is mutual. While people are opportunistic, people are more open to sharing information, collaborating, because collaboration is the key. And without collaboration, nothing will happen. So while people are opportunistic in bits and pieces, but overall collaboration is going to drive, and what is driving the whole industry towards better efficiencies. So that's my take on it, Ravi.
So I take your point on collaboration and communication. But coming back to the point of investment, what Vijay described were like decisions that are taken at an operational level, it's not at a tactical level. You also talked about, leveraging, taking the opportunities that are coming your way. And Vijay also mentioned that, a customer might be having a problem in his supply chain and it's disrupted. You take that opportunity. But some of these investments we take, build around creating resilience, would have a long-term impact, but the opportunity might be really short-term. So how do you justify a long-term investment? And what is the long-term impact of building that redundancy in the system? So question is for you and anybody else who wants to take it, Chandan or Vijay.
Well, just to go back to what Vijay had mentioned, it is a it's a it's a defined decision on what is the strategic investment that you make. And there are two aspects to it. One aspect is what is the P&L impact, and which is for what you work on. But there are certain redundancies that the cost will get inflated, the cost will increase, which is, in my understanding, the cost of doing business or cost of protecting a loss of business, which is bound to happen. So not everything will result in increased bottom line or a increased top line. It is, in my opinion, many of those things, I'm using the word very judiciously, many of those things would be a cost to ensure survival and protecting the top line and bottom line of the company. While opportunities, while we do that, the whole idea of resilience is to protect what we have. We are open that when opportunities come, those are points where we take advantage and leverage these opportunities to increase our top line and bottom line. Vijay, please, over to you. You can add.
Yeah. So Ravi, just to answer that point from a short-term perspective, okay. So I'll just take an example of COVID. Okay. So Alchem predominantly is known to be more of a antibiotic organization. We are number one in this space across India. Okay. But when pandemic happened, what was the message given to the general public? Okay. One is build immunity. Okay. And you people were also stocking, of course, chronic products and other things. But build immunity, for immunity, of course, there were vitamins, okay, or there was paracetamol. Okay. These were the two, and I would say one antibiotic which was always there. So health became very, I think in every household, I would say people started taking vitamins, okay. And because of certain regulatory restrictions and all that, uh, it was always looked at, okay, what's happening, okay, whether okay a particular organization or a competitor is not able to supply. We saw a huge jump in the kind of category of vitamins or supplements that we were selling across during pre-COVID and versus COVID. We could take some market share. Post-COVID, definitely it's not that because our lines, it's not that our lines are ideal or like it's a lines are specific only that okay, we can manufacture only this particular products. Okay, there is also certain agility in our production processes as well. But that's an opportunity during that particular 1 year or 1.5 year where we made sure that our market share for a particular products in the vitamin categories also grew higher because people conscious was there. Now, if in that market now this happened, it's not because supply chain, but because everybody collaborated and we also looked at what's information are happening. Okay. In fact, like we would also have informations like because of a COVID case, which plant is getting shut down for 14 days or 21 days or which because even the raw materials and other things were not coming into India. I think when we look at the other assessment of that, but that was the opportunity that we seized. Now saying that okay, whether we have come back to our pre-COVID levels in the vitamin segment, no. Though, of course, we picked up very well. We must have taken a double-digit growth in that particular strategy. But compared to COVID, we have actually almost grown double-digit year on year because customers need the product. Okay, if a product is not available of a particular company, DRL is not available, they will go to Alchem. Yeah, and they were buying, and now they are used to it. It's not that certain customers went back to the previous brands as well, but many of the customers also stick. But that's why we grew at a segment which was growing at a 5% level for us to almost double-digit levels. So definitely it plays in a wrong term without much investment is the category. Okay. A molecule specific investment, that's the call where it's more from a strategic perspective saying that we want to do this short term or we want to do it long term, unless we have to build an additional capex or opex. That's a big discussion which happens because that discussion goes into a lot of scrutiny. Okay. And then only we get into investment when it comes to resilience. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope I answered your
Of course, Vijay. Very, very sharp thinking, very clear articulation. Thanks for bringing that in. And you drew the distinction between a long-term and a strong-term strategy. Chandan, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so Raviji, it is a very relevant question, especially for the industry where we operate, because we face it very day in, day out. And I think Amit and Vijay added some valuable points. But my take on that would be, because internally we call it as looking beyond project level to the customer level. Because usually short-term projects. So one customer wants to come and do a project, it needs certain resiliency, certain capabilities. But we are not very sure what future holds for it. And this is our take. And rather than usually we follow this, especially in the supply chain, is not necessarily every resilience building has to happen in-house. Sometimes outsourcing or partnering can also be a good approach, taking care of your confidentiality and all. So if it is short term, using your might, your capabilities, you can look at finding a good partner who has that capability available or is in that line of business, and then utilize that as a joint opportunity. And once it scales up, then you can look to bring it back in-house. That can be a good way of balancing cost and business need. Because ultimately, if it is coming from a customer who is strategic to you, or a project which is in phase one, but you see a lot of potential to move to phase three, I'm talking about pre-commercialization, then as a CRO, CDMO, you would always like to explore that opportunity. So just because of the investment, you can't let it go. So that time outsourcing or third-party collaboration can definitely be one of the solutions.
So that's a very interesting answer, Chandan, because normally when people talk about resilience, the normal response is take more control of everything. Whatever is outside, try to bring it inside. De-risk it by bringing manufacturing inside, de-risk it by bringing R&D inside. But you are bringing in a different perspective of also leveraging on the strategic aspects of it, your external network. And when the situation changes in the product life cycle, you can bring it back in. So that's a very important dimension that you have brought to the discussion. Thank you for that, Chandan. I need to ask you another question, and it is a follow-up on what Amit and Vijay have said, and which is about collaboration, and which is also you mentioned about in your reply with external partners. Normally, we have been discussing about investment and de-risking and alternate vendor development, additional capacity, additional training. But there are other softer aspects of building resilience. So, what is your take on the role of communication, collaboration, engaging with stakeholders, uh, and other best practices? So number one, what is your take on the role of communication and collaboration? And what are some of the other softer best practices that an organization can cultivate to build resilience in the organization?
Very, very interesting question, Raviji. And definitely, I would say this spans beyond resilience. Any new initiative which any part of the organization, supply chain definitely, but any element of the organization is trying to drive, alignment of the stakeholders is very critical, and all that starts with communication, expectation setting, all that stuff. I think I remember reading one of the Harvard research study which said a success of any initiative depends on two factors: quality of the initiative, obviously how well it is going to deliver the results, but more than that, alignment of the stakeholders who are going to use that initiative. So when you are looking at building a resilience, one of the key factor, beyond designing the whole process and business proposals, as we just said, taking the management approvals and all, is going to be how are you going to align your stakeholders? How are you going to communicate? Because at many points, it is going to cause some disruption as well, some inconvenience as well. When you talk about inventory, then your people cost, your people management, your HR needs will go up. When you talk about technology, your infrastructure cost, your IT maintenance cost, your IT team efforts will go up. If you are talking about developing alternate vendor, your technical team assessment, your quality regulatory team assessment, needs of maintaining additional vendors are going to go up. So unless you communicate in the right perspective, do a right expectation setting. For me, more than communication, you have to set right expectations and also try to align them on the potential benefits which we are looking at a longer term are equally crucial. Having said that, for me is we have to look at it more as a top-down approach, where you first decide at a business level what are your key priorities. Then you come at a functional level and decide on how various functions can collaborate either to drive the business growth organically or by being more resilient, and then distribute the responsibility. So if we are talking about upgrading your vendors to avoid certain risks, I don't think supply chain can do it alone. You will need your technical team collaboration, you will need your regulatory and quality team collaborations. And likewise, if a quality team is trying to build some additional controls to ensure the material quality is consistent, what is coming inside, they will need to align the supply chain. So the point what I'm trying to drive is it has to get aligned to your business strategy at a management level and then flow it down slowly, ensuring that respective process owners are taking not only the ownership and accountability of implementing that change, but also aligning the stakeholders. So effective communication, expectation setting, and then always keeping people updated on the progress.
So expectation setting, more than communication, it is the way you're setting the expectation with your partners. You also talked about developing your partners, and then you talked about having a strategic alignment within the functions,
Yeah.
as you know, as some of the best practices that we can cultivate. Amit, I'll come back to you. Any more best practices you want to talk about for creating resilience as a culture?
I would just state one thing, like you have know your customer. I would say know your partner better. That is what drives. So engaging with the partners, visiting their facilities, keeping in touch with the key management personnel, and continuous discussions with them will and should help in building a strong resilience platform, because that is what drives everything. The key in a layman's language is just be present and continuously engage with your partners, all your critical, all your non-critical, because any disruption that comes, uh, the way to understand is by being present and being in constant discussion with the partners. One is internal, the other is we are an interface with the external world. So I would lay an emphasis, Ravi, on know your partner better and better, because just in a regulated environment, trust me, all of us, all my colleagues and the people in this industry would, uh, be aware that there are regulatory changes which people make and don't even notify. Now that is something is a very small challenge, and that brings back to communication. How do we communicate? How do we, now that is resilience, because that change is going to impact and have a disruption on what I do or what is this thing. So it goes back to doing the basics, and the basics are be in constant touch, engage, have the human touch, continuously engage, and keep exchanging information. And goes back to my point on IT enablement. If there are ways in which we can integrate and collaborate certain on a certain platform where these things can be seamlessly exchanged without losing the information in between.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yes,
So
yes.
basically, you're saying know your partner, just be present, back to basics. I think these three comments that you made are likely to go viral after this session, Amit. But Vijay, I'll come back to you. Uh, I mean, we just to kind of recalibrate and stepping back, and coming back to the main discussion. Uh, what are the what is the cost of failure to kind of build resilience? Just to pull the discussion back on to Amit's point, back to basics. Just go
Yeah.
back to basics. What are the costs of not being resilient?
The cost of not being resilient, I can tell you, is maybe you are risking an organization to not being even relevant in the past, in future. Okay, it's a constant changing world. Okay, so what has got us here may not get us there. I think there's a wonderful book once while interacting with Venkatesh, he talked on that. Okay, wonderful concept, and I fully align on that. So if you don't build for future, if you don't build anything, the cost of it, it can cost business, it can cost relevance to you. Okay. So companies, of course, who are focusing, let's say, on an R&D or any molecule, it's not that today every company which works on, you clearly end up actually having that particular, it's more of an investment kind of a thing. Okay. But if you try and see that, okay, if I invest, I definitely would get 10x out of it in the next few years. That would be, I would say, too much of an ask. Okay. So, in my view, I think we should constantly look at challenging the status quo. And if that has to happen, so we need to build continuous resilience. As I said, keep on monitoring short term and long term strategic plans, how it actually is going well with the organization. Because if you don't keep changing with times, okay, and don't keep on, it's not that it has to be also fixed that, okay, what you thought at the start of the year, but if the dynamics are changing, you need to keep on building an agile strategy where you can adapt what's happening across the globe and try and build things in a way where you're able to not only build a culture for an organization but also for your team, where very clear is to make sure if you have to survive in the future. Okay. And today it's a very competitive world. Okay. The rankings keep on, you must be seeing in the domestic market as well as international market what's happening within the pharma companies. Okay. Many of the international pharma companies are collaborating, okay, with trying to make sure few of the Indian pharma companies who has good foothold into the market by this is more of a strategic change so that like they are able to sell more volumes and they can focus on their core competencies. Okay, so these kind of things will definitely go a long way in terms of making sure in the long term the company is also sustainable, not only for the next 5 or 10 years, but maybe for the next 25 years. Yeah.
Very, very clear point, Vijay. So long-term sustainability, differentiate between short-term goals and long-term goals. It's about adaptability and agility. But as you said, it's also about survival. And that was a word Amit also had used in his response earlier. So thanks for that, Vijay. There is a question in the chat box, and I think it's a contentious question, and I think people want to hear your thoughts on that. The question is, and it's for all the panelists, what are we doing enough to reduce dependency on countries like China for pharma supply chain? Chandan, starting with you.
Yeah, definitely. So Raviji, that's something which is now not only for the supply chain. I think it's all from the board, everything is being monitored. Yeah, how are we de-risking our supply chain? And China dependency has come out as one of the biggest risks for various reasons, geopolitical as well as other factors associated with it. What are we doing around it? Definitely, we are trying to upscale not only internally, but also looking at upgrading the ecosystem, because today a lot of dependency on China. So when I say reducing China dependency is something I am buying from China and I find a vendor or supply partner locally, but it does not serve the purpose if he is buying his raw materials further from China. And that's the biggest challenge we are facing. I want to be very open about it. So yes, we have reduced our direct dependency on China, but now the focus is on how do we reduce tier 2, tier 3 dependency. Because an organization of a scale of Anagen can always influence, but upgrading the ecosystem is very important. And thankfully, Government of India, under the various other industries ministers, is really
Yeah.
driving this change very positively. I see a lot of PLI schemes which are coming around, which are encouraging local production. There is a lot of support on the MSME, on which we are very dependent, hugely dependent for our KSM supplies. So a lot of factors are being done, and it's let me tell you, it's a KPI of mine as a supply chain head. How much I have reduced my supply chain dependency on China. So that itself speaks about the importance what our management is giving towards reducing dependency. And thankfully, we have shown positive result. And in our industry also, I get to hear everybody is progressing positively on it.
Thanks, Chandan. Very clear answers. Develop the ecosystem, not only reduce your direct dependencies, also your indirect dependencies. Amit, your response to it.
So my only take is, no matter how to what level you go, you are still going to be dependent on China, because all the basic chemicals come from there. And we have seen instances that as you keep going one level below, uh, the chemicals which were at $1 would become $10 straight. So the obviously, they China as a country is exploiting the the advantage that they have built over the last 20, 30 years. And that is something that it's not only for India. I have had this conversation with a lot of business partners across the globe. And together we were trying to do something where we would de risk. The question here now is, at what cost can we de risk China? Because it is not only about de-risking, it is about paying a higher price for moving away from China. How many of us are really willing to do that, considering that we have to be very competitive in the market? And I strongly believe unless we all come together as a collective, decision that we need to de-risk on certain things. Uh, One is from the government initiative, the other is from the industry initiative, uh, because we all compete in the same markets, and it all goes back to, are we willing to pay the price for de-risking or China plus one? So that's where I leave it, and I would leave that as a food for thought for everyone on this discussion panel, because definitely I have had personal interactions and instances when one of my partners, he came across and said, you know what, Amit, I've gone down to the chemicals. Now I want one company in Europe. If five of us come together, I don't mind paying double the price, but I would want them to start in Europe and make sure that we are completely de-risked. So while we de-risk China on many fronts, I believe uh, if I'm making an overstatement, we are by long shot far away in totally de-risking from China. We globally we are going to be dependent on them, and that's some reality. The only thing is, how do we really look at what are we willing to pay to move away from them? That's my take on it, Ravi.
Perfect. And thanks for being so candid. Are we willing to pay the price for de-risking China? Vijay, uh,
Uh,
your
Yeah,
thoughts
I
on the
think
subject?
Chandan and Amit actually have summed that up. I can only say that we'll have to wait and watch. Of course, prior few years back, there was no government initiative, but now with the PLI scheme, at least there's some, I would say, from a political standpoint of view. Okay, the present government is looking at how we can be pharmacies, continue to be pharmacies of the world, and if for that, right from KSMs to a key APIs, if we are able to build some good volumes inside. But yeah, the future definitely, start is good, intent is good. Maybe we'll have to come back in next 3 to 5 years down the line and see how well we have progressed. Okay, whether we were able to succeed in that objective or we are still lagging behind. I would say that time would say that whether we are in a better position to de-risk from China. Yeah, we have to wait and watch.
Okay. Venkatesh, I'll just take 2 more minutes. Uh, Chandan, Amit, and Vijay, thank you for that very engaging and very insightful discussion. And I think you really brought your experience and the huge experience that you have, behind you. You really were able to put it for the benefit of our audience over there. I personally benefited a lot from a lot of what I heard by the panelists, and my sincere gratitude to you for that. But just within a minute for each of you, any concluding, how would you conclude the entire discussion, starting with Chandan and then Amit, Vijay, and then we'll hand it over back to Venkatesh. Concluding remarks.
Thank you, Raviji. I think it was a good discussion, and I myself had a lot of insights. But some of the things which are definitely key takeaways: resilience is what we say fittest will survive. So resilience is going to be very critical for any organization to survive. But a food for thought for Venkatesh, maybe for future panel discussions. There is another change which is approaching the industry, which is ESG, the focus on ESG. I think how well industries are prepared, and that is going to also test industry resiliency, especially pharma, who operate with so much of regulated, and we deal with chemicals. So how are we going to fulfill, especially on the sustainability factor, environment, E out of ESG is also going to be there. But I thoroughly enjoyed being here, Raviji, and special thanks to you, Raviji, for really triggering right discussion, channelizing it rightly, and also going more deeper into the certain aspects which were critical for having an effective outcome. And pleasure to meet you, Vijay, Amit. And thanks once again, Venkatesh, and your whole team for organizing it.
Thank you. Amit.
Um, Thank you for this enlightened discussion and enlightened panel. Uh, very distinguished members. Thank you so much. Only three things I would say. Resilience, agility, and sustainability. These are the three pillars, in my understanding, which will be the fulcrum of existence of the pharma industry in the future. So I would rest my case at that, because that's the third aspect which Chandan brought in is has started gaining, and you see the top 5, top 10 companies already reporting it in their annual reports, and also the only other thing that I would like to mention, that I was part of one other conference somewhere, and apart from pharma, the sustainability in terms of the food and the FMCG is far evolved, and I think as pharma industry we lag far behind in terms of adopting. Uh, so that's something that is going to drive and change in the future, and that's going to drive and change the future of the pharma industry and organizations that operate in pharma space. So thank you once again, Venkatesh and everyone. It has been a lovely time discussing with everyone.
Thanks,
Vijay.
Amit.
Thank you. Ravi, you have moderated this session really well. Compliments to you, and thank you for asking some uh, tough and the right questions as well. And very blessed to have Amit and Chandan hearing their views and learning from every one of you. I think it was a pleasure. Thank you, Venkatesh and team, once again for inviting me. I would only say that resilience has, of course, it's a continuous evolving world. Now, sustainability is one of the challenge in the resilience world, which we'll have to tackle. Okay, if we have to, particularly in the international market, if any organization has to make a mark, particularly pharma companies, I think that will be a game changer for every organizations in the near future. With that, thank you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijay. And thank you, Venkatesh, and to your team for giving us this opportunity to have this very insightful and a very in-depth discussion. Thanks again to all the panelists for bringing your best out in the discussion. Over to you, Venkatesh. Thank you.
Hats off to Ravi, Amit, Chandan, and Vijay, because this is such a boring subject, and I'm sure not in a single word would have got missed out by this audience. And you all made it really interesting, and it's not easy. Engaging in a topic like this for nearly 1.5 hours, this is amazing. And that also, it's knowing is one part, and articulating and making it interesting is a big part that you all made it. And special thanks to Vijay also for remembering that book. Now I'm going to recommend one more book, The Art of Clear Thinking, Timeless Rules for Tough Decisions. This is written by a F-16 pilot. That's an amazing book I have ever read in the recent times. So I would request all of you to pick up that book if you have not done it yet. And thank you once again, Ravi, because you really articulated and put up the things and brought up the ideas, and really got it highlighted. That's a highlight of the entire discussion. And so to say, I'm really proud that we have such wonderful gems within our elite community, and you all make it. Thank you very much, and